Imagine you're a man and you just want to have some fun, so you go on a trip to Disney. You go to Orlando, Florida to a Disney Springs restaurant with your wife, but she's allergic to dairy and nuts. No problem. You let the waiters know and they assure you that the food will be free from any dairy or nuts. Not once do they assure you, but twice. But as you and your wife sit there eating your food, suddenly she has an allergic reaction to her food. She collapses to the ground and she dies. It turns out that despite the waiter's reassurance, the food was contaminated after all. After enduring such a traumatizing death, you decide to file a wrongful death lawsuit with Disney to get justice for your wife that died as a result of their carelessness, only to have Disney say,
sorry, actually, you can't sue us.
Why is this the case, you ask? Because you signed up for a Disney Plus free trial a long time ago and accepted the terms of service. One of the things written in the terms of service on page 1473 states that you agree not to sue them. Under no circumstances can you sue them. This is the case of Jeffrey Piccolo, who is trying to get justice for the untimely death of his wife by suing Walt Disney Parks and Resorts for their negligence that killed his wife.
I'm gonna sue you out of existence.
However, he has been unsuccessful in doing so for now, simply just because of the terms he accepted when signing up for his free trial of Disney Plus, which essentially says that he must give up his right to a fair trial, and instead he has to use arbitration to get justice. Although he's still fighting for justice, there's a very good possibility that he won't be able to get it.
Jury will now go off and deliberate on...
Guilty! That nigga is guilty!
Sir, settle down. You have to go deliberate.
I don't need to deliberate. Hang that nigga now. I got the rope right here.
So what exactly is arbitration? Essentially, arbitration is a private agreement between individuals where both parties agree that neither of them will sue the other in a court of law. Instead of a lawsuit, all disputes will be handled outside of a courtroom and decided by an unrelated, neutral third party instead of a judge. That third party is known as an arbitrator. Arbitration was initially made as a way of resolving issues without getting the state involved, but over the last few decades, it has turned into a way for companies to get away with literally murder and do so without being charged or punished by the law. And you might think, okay, well, all I need to do is just to avoid agreeing to arbitration by refusing to sign or agree to anything that requires arbitration. As long as I don't sign or agree to anything, then I won't ever be put in a situation where I'm not able to file a lawsuit and I'll never be denied my justice, right? Wrong.
That is not correct.
The problem with this is that forced arbitration is literally everywhere. And when I say everywhere, I mean everywhere. It is inescapable. Most jobs have forced arbitration in papers you need to sign in order to be employed by them. If you're renting an apartment, chances are you're in an arbitration agreement with your landlord. Have you ever opened a bank account? Then you probably agree to forced arbitration. Don't even get me started on the online platforms, because almost every single one has some sort of line in their terms of service that says something along the lines of, by using our site, you agree to arbitration. The truth is, unless you're living completely off the grid, like you're living the Amish life or something, you are not able to live a functional life without encountering a forced arbitration agreement at one point or another. But how did it all begin? Around the turn of the Industrial Revolution, a lot of factory owners in New York were getting tired of their employees constantly filing lawsuits against them. They claimed it was a huge expense of both time and money, and it was harming their business. Their pushback to these lawsuits eventually led to the New York Arbitration Act of 1920, which was the act that ultimately set the standard for the Federal Arbitration Act of 1925, or the FAA for short. This law allows arbitration contracts for everything except for foreign or interstate commerce, such as railroad workers. Although the Federal Arbitration Act had passed back in 1925, the legal precedent for companies using this power of forced arbitration as a shield had not been set until 1984, during the case of Southland versus Keating. Southland was a 7-Eleven franchisor of Keating, who was the franchisee. Basically, long story short, Keating brought a class action lawsuit to Southland alleging a breach of contract. This dispute made its way to the Supreme Court, where it was ultimately decided that they had to settle matters using arbitration. This case set a legal precedent that essentially emboldened companies to abuse, lie to, and act unjustly towards their consumers and employees, and they just get to use the shield of forced arbitration to avoid any real legal consequences. And this issue has only gotten worse ever since that case. The truth is, the story of Jeffrey Piccolo losing his wife is just one of a million cases cases in which people have had their lives ruined with no way of holding these companies accountable. There was also the case of John and Georgia McGinty, who were both seriously injured after their Uber crashed into another car. They tried to file a lawsuit, but apparently because their daughter signed up for Uber Eats and accepted the terms of service, one of which was arbitration, now they can't do anything about it. Forced arbitration is borderline inhumane, and it's literally one of the worst laws to have ever come out of this country in recent history, and it's what I want to talk about today because it's honestly ridiculous. I want to examine exactly how arbitration completely undermines the concept of justice itself, and it's letting corporate America literally run rampant without any consequences. The first reason why forced arbitration is just terrible is because the arbitrator is never ever truly fair. There's a reason why all good lawyers tell you never sign an arbitration agreement if you don't have to, and it's because it's almost always a losing game for the consumer. For the most part, these arbitrators have some sort of legal background, like being a former lawyer or having some experience in the justice system, but from my understanding, arbitrators can honestly just be anyone that the company chooses. And yes, I did say anyone the company chooses, because the company is the one that ultimately decides who they want to hire to serve as the arbitrator. This is a clear conflict of interest because the arbitrator has the financial incentive to side with the company, since the company is the one that hired them. The company is the one that pays them. Arbitrators are technically supposed to be an unbiased, neutral third party that serves in the place of an actual judge, but in reality, they are very, very rarely unbiased. Imagine if you're settling a dispute between two people. One of them gives you an income of a couple $1,000s a month, and the other one is just some random Joe that hasn't given you anything at all. Obviously, you're gonna rule in favor of your employer because you want to stay on their good side and not get fired. That is ultimately why an arbitrator will never ever truly be unbiased like a judge will, because whatever decision they come to, their job is literally on the line. Not to mention that arbitrators make a very big portion of their money through being referred to by other companies. For example, if Apple is happy with the work of one of their arbitrators that they've hired, they will typically give them a positive review and refer that arbitrator to other companies, which is all the more incentive for the arbitrator to stay on the employer's good side. This is proven by the fact that settlements with arbitration are on average much more favorable towards the employer and the company than they are to the employee or the customer. The next reason why arbitration is terrible is because it literally defeats the whole purpose of rights. The 7th Amendment states that you have a right to a jury in civil cases. That is a constitutional right that has essentially been taken away because you're unable to participate in modern society without being forced to sign it away. The whole point of rights is that there are certain things that are granted to you that can't be taken away. That's literally the whole point of rights. If modern society is able to essentially just revoke these rights, then literally what is even the point of a right? Not only does arbitration undermine the rights of U.S. residents, but it also sets a very dangerous precedent for undermining more rights in the future.
Hi, I'm Saul Goodman. Did you know that you have rights? The Constitution says you do.
If a corporation is able to take away your constitutional right to a trial, who's to say they won't take away more rights? For example, the First Amendment gives you not only the freedom of speech, but the freedom of religion. Let's say that in your employer's contract, it states that you must agree to waive your right to freedom of religion in order to work there. Does that mean that an employer all of a sudden is allowed to require Muslim women to remove their hijabs? Or what if a company were to put in their contract that by signing your name, you agree to waive your 14th Amendment rights? Does that mean that we're all of a sudden going to allow companies to start discriminating based on race and gender? Seriously, what is the point of a right if it can't be protected? That no matter what happens, these rights belong to each person. Of course, you could make the argument that this isn't always the case because there are some states where convicted felons aren't allowed to purchase firearms. Technically, their Second Amendment rights were taken away from them. However, I think the biggest difference here is that their rights were a potential danger to the public. Kind of like how sending a bomb threat isn't protected under the First Amendment due to it threatening public safety. That's not the same as just the average person having their rights taken away. The next reason why arbitration is just terrible is because it doesn't hold companies accountable for their misdeeds. I feel like people are literally so concerned with government overreach, governments controlling us, that they don't see that the people really controlling us are corporations in the private sector. People always talk about American patriotism and freedom from government overreach. Meanwhile, an Amazon warehouse worker gets paralyzed and nobody can do anything about it because that's just the free market economy, and free free markets are always best, according to Charlie Kirk. Not only does it not hold them accountable through legal punishments, arbitration also fails to hold companies accountable in the court of public opinion. This is because almost every case of arbitration is handled privately and it is confidential. Contrast this to all court cases that don't involve minors or something, and all of them are essentially available for public record. This means that if a company does something really bad, but it uses arbitration, not only are they let off the hook most of the time, but their public image also isn't damaged at all because it's private, it's confidential, and the public isn't even aware most of the times of the things that they've done. Another reason why forced arbitration is just evil is because it can be used against the consumer. Remember when I said that the arbitrator will always side in favor of the company, regardless of the consumer's complaints against them? This also goes in the reverse, and the arbitrator could also side with the company if they try and sue a consumer or an employee. That's right. Instead of you using arbitration to settle your issues with the company can do the exact same to you. And since the arbitrators are always on their side, they can potentially make a false accusation, and if the arbitrator agrees, then you have to pay up even if the accusation was false. And of course, you can't have your case heard by a judge or have a fair trial. So you can essentially be unfairly punished for no reason, and it's completely legal. The arbitrator can also choose to ignore any evidence you bring to the table to try and defend yourself whenever they want, and the company can withhold any evidence they want to as well, which is very different from like a court case. And finally, forced arbitration, it's just wrong. It's just wrong. It literally is. Even without me talking about all the legal precedent and the overreach of corporate power, the fact of the matter is it's just not right. Jeffrey Piccolo deserves justice for what his wife endured. These people deserve justice. People deserve to get closure. They deserve to see their abuser punished to the fullest extent of the law. In many cases, justice has just not been served.